what we really wanted to do when we made the push to introduce autonomous vehicles in a residential area. We wanted to make sure that people will get to see it, interact with it in various forms, right? We want you to see it, and we want you to get comfortable with it. When the autonomous vehicle is still learning, what you want is somebody who is there to make sure that he or she is able to intervene.
So they got a real job to do that. Yeah. They're not there to DJ or choose music to play and all that.
No. I wish it was that simple.
That would be cool if they can also do that.
Correct. Well, we're using autonomous buses to bring the elderly together. They all need to go to medical appointments. It's a very unsocial sort of thing, right? Then you have to bring a lot of the community together for gatherings and so on. But what if you could actually recreate that while going on your way to a medical appointment? I thought that was quite interesting.
The seniors party bus.
Yeah, it's
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of 𝘗𝘪𝘀, your thrice weekly podcast where we talk about the hottest news with a touch of what, Terrence?
Good old humor.
Good old humor, man.
Yeah.
So today is a special and I guess important episode with everything that's going on around the world with, AI, autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles.
Yeah. And I mean, us also getting to experience that firsthand for ourselves as well.
Yeah,
it's quite monumental.
Yeah, and I mean, with us today, we have someone who has been at the forefront of autonomous vehicles in Singapore. And it's Nicholas Ng, director at LTA, who oversees the Center for Autonomous Mobility. Welcome, Nicholas.
Hey, hi Harish, hi Terrence.
Yeah,
nice to be here.
Yeah.
Happy to be here with you all.
Awesome, man. I mean, we were with you in the vehicle yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think, there was, we incidentally had done a video 10 years ago about the early autonomous vehicle research in Singapore. And that was at a buggy stage.
Yes.
Yesterday, I think that was my first time in an autonomous vehicle.
Yeah, it was my first time other than talking about roller coasters or whatever.
Yeah.
But
or
first
Circle
time,
Line or something.
First time on a car, autonomous vehicle car. And understanding that, it's part of a trial in Singapore, right?
Yeah.
But maybe that's a place to start. What exactly is this trial going on in Singapore that we experienced yesterday?
Yeah, so Harish, I remember that video that you had 10 years ago. So, those were the days 10 years ago. I think it was really the early days, right? When I think autonomous vehicles was still something banded more like a concept, right? Rather than something that you expect to see over the next 5 years or so.
Yeah.
I remember that because it was a very memorable video with the dog.
Yeah.
Suddenly self-driving and people being surprised like, why is the dog the driver, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was very catchy. Something that I'll keep in mind when we
dogs,
dogs driving.
Dogs,
so I think we have been working on autonomous vehicles, I think, for at least 10 years in Singapore. So Singapore was one of the first countries to actually trial autonomous vehicles. I think we started our efforts actually back in 2013, 2014, right? And we ran all sorts of trials. I think we designated One North as a trial area. So if you were there, I think during the 2014 to 2017 period, you have seen quite a few vehicles trialing that area, like in cars, buses, minibuses. And we partnered with research institutions, right? So, for example, the dog driving the buggy was a project with SMART. I think there was another one, I think, with ST Engineering and with NTU. That was for buses. And that was the period where we were really trying to just figure out the technology, right? How mature is the technology? How far are we from, the actual a reality of a autonomous vehicle actually flying the roads? And I think fast forward maybe 10 years to today, we are looking at it becoming a reality. I think 2 years ago, Sentosa, RWS, had actually partnered with a technology provider to actually start a shuttle bus service, a fixed scheduled shuttle bus service just around, the Resorts World Sentosa stops, right? 4 or 5 stops. And that was the first foray. And that went quite well. That was very successful. It was very safe. And we thought, why not take the next step? let's move it from just being like a tourist novelty into something that really can impact the lives of citizens and residents. And so we decided to start autonomous vehicle trials in the residential area, and we settled on Punggol. So today, if you visit Punggol, you'll see about 10 to 16 vehicles at any time, at any point of time, plying the roads across 3 routes. Two of these routes are operated by Grab with its technology provider WeRide, and the other route is operated by ComfortDelGro and Pony AI.
I see. I mean, we're going to go deep into what the current trial is, but just going back to what you were saying, that even when we made that video, that was like 10 years ago. And I felt like, wow, this technology 10 years ago, I felt, this technology will be out in like a few years. Then it seemed I didn't hear about a lot more developments for quite a number of years. But then suddenly in the past 1-2 years, like everything suddenly accelerated. Is there a reason why there's this feeling like everything accelerated in the AV space?
Yeah, I think it's just the normal pathways that I think breakthroughs in technology happen. So if you had to rewind a little bit more, right, this self-driving car project, its birthplace, I think, was actually a DARPA project, if I recall. Right?
DARPA is the defense.
Yes, in the US, right? So they have grand challenges, right? And I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, they launched this challenge where they said, let's see if you can build a self-driving vehicle. Not to say that before that there weren't any attempts. I think in the 90s there was an attempt by some academics to actually manage to do it in a very limited way. And that's where I think a lot of the developmental work started spinning out, right? Not just in the area of autonomous vehicles, but also then into robotics, right? So if you see all the humanoid robotics doing all the somersaulting and so on, a lot of the technology, the core technology, came from this grand challenge, right? And I think fast forward, I think back in the 2010s, I think there was some breakthroughs in terms of, the AI models. That's number one. I think the hardware, the sensor suite, the sensor perception suite, there was a breakthrough in terms of how to classify and identify the kind of objects that the sensors pick up, right? And I think there was also then a breakthrough in terms of the fidelity of the hardware sensors. So you're talking about your LiDAR, you're talking about your radar, and also then how they were able to fuse that. Then you couple with breakthroughs in terms of, I think, AI, right? When you're able to just fuse all these separate inputs together, and then from there be able to plan, right, and make decisions on what to do. Right? So those are all the things that had to happen or to be developed in order for autonomous vehicles to become a reality. So all the stuff about machine learning, AI models and so on, and it's continuing to evolve. Right? So I think I talked about it in like discrete parts, right? You talk about perception first, then to planning, then to decision making, and then after that, the actual actuation, right? You're pressing on the brakes, the steering and so on. But in recent years, I think, or in recent months, you have heard that a lot of the companies are now talking about end-to-end, right? Everything happens through the AI. Once the inputs come in, it goes into the AI model that does everything, and then it just comes out as an action.
As opposed to what was it before?
So previously, it was in terms of the what I call agents, right? Again, I might be mischaracterizing it, but the sensor suite, right, and the perception was a discrete model. Right? The planning and decision making was a discrete model. Right, and then the actual decision and the actuation is a discrete model. But now what they're doing is they're fusing all together. So, remains to be seen whether that would lead to a marked improvement in performance. Of course, the next bound will be then if it all goes into a model and comes out as an action, then what happens in between? Because a lot of it is then self-learning, right? And when you're talking about AI self-learning, it becomes important, right, as a next bound that you need to really then think about, how do you decode what exactly the AI is learning?
Otherwise, it's Terminator lah.
I mean, I wouldn't go there. But it then creates certain what I call edge case scenarios, right? Because if the logic might not be quite right, and I think what it does, I think all these AI models does is really just probabilistic, and they learn from thousands and thousands and millions of data sets, right? On what's right and what's wrong, and then it self-learns on what's right and what's wrong. And if there's one or two instances that's not quite correct, then when it comes to an edge case scenario, right, the 1 in a million sort of situations that happen, right, then you're not quite sure how to react.
Okay.
But of course, there are redundancies to that.
With the evolution of tech is super interesting. But at the same time, how about the evolution of Nicholas? Like, what brought you into this space and to, be over the last 10 years, essentially be looking at the space and being so involved in it?
It's a funny story. I actually graduated with a degree in political science. The furthest
super relevant.
Relevant in the sense of understanding the broad geopolitics of technology and so on. But nothing about the actual technical bits about technology.
It's okay. I graduated engineering. He graduated finance. And now we're
on the room talking about
it. But it was an interesting journey because I've had a good bunch of friends, right, who are all techies, right? So they have always been telling me about the latest developments and so on. And that's where I started nurturing, this interest in emerging technology. And I started my career in civil aviation. So I was with the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore, working on air hub policies, air traffic rights, negotiations to sort of like open up airways for our airlines to fly and vice versa. Then there was an opening at the Ministry of Transport for this very cool sounding division called the Futures Division.
The Futures.
Yeah, it's a Futures division.
Futures. Okay.
Yeah, and I said, why not, right? It sounded interesting, right? So when I went in, that was when I first got in touch with autonomous vehicles because it was one of the projects that the division was managing.
And that was which year?
That was back in 2016.
Oh, so the same time our first brush with autonomous vehicles.
Towards the end of 2016.
Oh, man. Okay.
There's life and coincidences.
Yeah.
But I didn't work on autonomous vehicles, right? My colleagues worked on it. I had a privilege of joining them on a few rides. They were very interesting rides. But I was working on others. I was working on drones, drone policy, and trying to also build up the drone ecosystem and put in place all the policy and regulations. And I did that for quite a few years. Then I went over to LTA. There was an opening to talk about how we could scale up the deployment of electric vehicles. Right, okay. And I think when it came to electric vehicles, I think there's a chicken egg sort of a problem, right? You want to bring in more electric vehicles, but at the same time, for it to become viable, you need a very good charging network, right? And I thought that was an interesting problem to take a crack at. Yeah. So I applied, and thankfully my boss said, yeah, sure. So I worked on it for 2-3 years. Then thereafter, I took a break. I got married. I took a break. Went to London, did a master's in technology management. And then while studying there, one of my previous bosses contacted me and asked, would you be interested in taking up this role, overseeing this autonomous vehicle baby, right? Trying to scale up the deployment of autonomous vehicles and putting in place the ecosystem and the enablers needed for autonomous vehicles to thrive, right, safely in a vibrant manner. So I said, yeah, why not, right? It sounded cool, right? Here we are.
So I mean, you mentioned that, okay, in a few years ago, an ex-boss called you and said, okay, we help nurture this baby. In 2016, you got involved in the Futures Division. 2013 was when, you mentioned the trials or Singapore's AV journey started. But what is the push for AV vehicles in Singapore? Because, for me, I'm like, okay, government's supposed to take care of its people. But the technology here is almost like taking people out of it. Or is that the wrong way of looking at it? What is the push to have AV vehicles deployed?
So I think that's a good question. I think back in 2013, right, when we first started looking at autonomous vehicles, that was also when the Futures Division was set up. Right. The thinking, right, the core thinking, hopefully I don't misrepresent this, but the core thinking was really about, even as we focus on the practicalities of today, right? There are many things and many issues, right, that we need to work on from rail, from buses, roads, etc. Right? We also need to preserve some space for the future, right? Things that are transformative, right? Things that would really fundamentally transform the way we work, we live, we play. Right, and when we did a quick horizon scan of what are the upcoming technologies that was on the horizon, right? Obviously, AI was one of it, but AI and transport is a bit iffy, right? Like AI can be applied to anything, right? And then that's where we stumbled upon two things, right? One was autonomous vehicles, and one was this thing called drones, right? Both were very nascent, right? Both just entered the public consciousness, right? And based on the technological breakthroughs and so on. So drones went ahead first because it was commoditized, productized, and I think the technology curve was a lot more mature compared to autonomous vehicles. But when we looked at autonomous vehicles, then we started asking ourselves, hey, this is really transformative, right? It could change the way in how we conceive and perceive transport, right? Getting from one point to another, right? And actually getting from one point to another is a fundamental thing that everybody does, right? So every Singaporean does, right? Actually, beyond that, globally, everybody does, right? And imagine having a chance to reshape how people move, right? How people move to work, how people move to where they want to play, right? How do people move back home, right? And then from there, we started thinking, then what kind of implications will it have on public transport? What are the sort of benefits that we have, right? And they are twofold. I think one would be really the chance to then see how we can provide better connections, right? A more direct connectivity for the residents, right? And for Singaporeans. The other is also then how it can help to augment our public transport network, right? And that's what we've been doing, trying to see how autonomous vehicle technology can also be applied to public buses. Yeah. That's a big step because a lot of the technology now are focused on cars, right? Or MPVs and shuttles, minibuses. But in terms of the bigger buses, still not quite yet. But again, that's why we wanted to take a good look at it, understand how it could be integrated into a public transport network, right? In a way that, is operationally feasible. And also then from a user or journey perspective, right, to the commuters, something that still remains seamless. And it's not easy. So that's the second one. And of course, the third one is then to sort of overcome some of the manpower constraints. And that's not just for public transport, but also then for many sectors that rely on transportation, right? You talk about the logistics sector, right? Be it your big palletized trucks, right, that carry the pallets around, or maybe the minivans and so on that really transport goods, right, for B2B or B2C, right, like your Shopee and so on. And then even for other users, for example, your road sweepers, right? So I have a company, 𝘧𝘧𝘏, that been piloting the use of robot sweepers, not just on public roads, but also then on public paths, right? And it helps to improve productivity, right? And frees up people to really focus on what really matters, right? When it comes to some of these jobs, rather than some of the more mundane things that actually can be automated.
So what would be things like that really matter? Because, I mean, I'm glad you addressed the fact that it's also able to do things that humans can't or overcome certain constraints. But because there's one big concern about AI, right? And AI and robotics, it's going to take away roles that humans could potentially do. But then what are these humans going to
do? So I think that's a good question. The role of AI and robots, they look at the trajectory that they are on, right? It's not really about doing things that humans cannot do. It's actually a little bit more mundane than that. Doing repetitive, simpler things, or more what I call predictive or consistent things that that humans, I think, if you were to ask them to do, they may not be so interested in doing. Right? I think that's one, right? So, for example, driving, the actual driving itself. But when you think about the roles, right, of all these like drivers and so on, a lot of them play bigger roles than just driving. Right. So, for example, if you're talking about a bus driver, actually, the role of bus driver is not just about driving, right? It's about managing the commuters, right? It's about maybe even something a little bit more social, right? You've seen a lot of stories of how the bus drivers, the way in which they make the bus journey a pleasant one. And that's what I call the human aspect that I think AI or autonomous vehicle technology cannot replace for now, right? And there are also more complex tasks, right? So a lot of the maintenance, right, cannot be done by robotics at this juncture, right? Some of the higher order tasks also, for example, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, we have this role called the remote operator. So the remote operator is one where he is able to monitor the operations of the vehicle in a remote location, hence remote operator. And when needed, right, or when pinged by the vehicle, when it encounters a situation that it cannot handle, then it's expected the operator will then come in and then direct or suggest to the operator, to the vehicle, how to proceed. Right? So these are the more complex tasks, right, that I think technology today still cannot overcome. And that's where the role of the human still remains paramount.
I mean, we saw it on the trial drive that we were on yesterday, where there was a safety officer, if I'm not wrong, that's what they call, right? A safety officer who is seated in the driver's seat of the vehicle as well. And they're not actually touching the steering wheel or what, but they're still looking around, making sure, that everything runs smoothly. Do you see it as, it will come sort of like there needs to be a human paired with the machine in order to, complete the full experience? Will that be a feature that will be there for the foreseeable future?
No, that's a good question. I think personally, my take on all things technology is that the technology itself it's cold, right? But actually, what turns it into something really usable and something that really appeals to people is the injection of the human element, right, in various aspects. And my take on technology, including autonomous vehicle technology, is that it has to complement or it has to be complemented by humans in some form or manner.
Yeah.
So the role of the safety operator really is, I would call it a temporary thing, but it will be what I call a long temporary thing, because the role of safety operator is really to be there, to intervene, to be ready to intervene when the vehicle does something unexpected, right? And the operator needs to take over for safety-related reasons, and the safety operator has the full authority to do so, right? To override the autonomous vehicle and the AI that powers it. And that's one role, right? And it is important because when it comes to autonomous vehicles, the technology is mature, right? You are able to then do mapping, right? Before the vehicles start flying, right? So it really knows and maps it has mapped the area. It knows where it's going, but there's still localized issues, right? That may not pop up in mapping, right? Objects that may not pop up, traffic situations that may not pop up, and all this requires learning by the autonomous vehicle. And when the autonomous vehicle is still learning, right, then what you want is somebody who is there to make sure that he's able, or he or she is able to intervene when it assesses that something may go slightly awry, right, for example. And that's the role of safety operator. And beyond that, the safety operator also plays an important role in helping the technology providers and the developers understand the local conditions and understand how to adapt the technology and the associated behaviors that it does, right, to a more localized setting.
Yeah.
So, for example, when the autonomous vehicle is operating along the road, if the safety operator thinks that there are certain maneuvers that maybe are not safety critical, so he or she doesn't need to intervene, but could be fine-tuned. Right, for example, maybe the lane cutting is a little bit too abrupt, for example. Then he or she can make a note right, on the dashboard. I mean, it depends on the technology provider, right? It's able to make a note, right, to say that, this is something that needs to be reviewed. Right, then after every session or at the end of every day, he or she will then make a download, sort of like a debrief, right? To say, okay, this is what happened. These are the areas that I think maybe can be done better, right? Then the technology provider take on this feedback, and you go and tweak the models and the decision making and so on. And then the next day they go out and then they run it again.
So they got a real like job to do that. Yeah. They're not there to like DJ or choose music to play and all that.
No, I wish it was that simple.
That would be cool if they can also do that. Correct.
Well,
that one cannot use AI. That one is all about
it's the human
emotion,
touch lah. It's the human touch. Yeah.
But you don't. Yes, it's true. But I've been on autonomous vehicles, right? Or at least some of my colleagues have been also that can do that themselves, right? So
true.
Oh, you mean the vehicles can do that?
Play music.
Yeah. So, for example, I think in China, for example, right, there are quite a few autonomous vehicle tech providers, right? So some of them are functionally safe, right? So if you sit there, it's safe, but it's
boring.
Right. You scroll your phone, and so and there are those that provide a full suite experience, right? The chairs are massage chairs. You can karaoke.
For real?
Yeah, you can karaoke on the vehicle, etc. So it's just a fun experience, right? And actually, you don't really need a safety driver. In fact, if a safety driver, maybe you don't really want a karaoke because the guy will be judging me, right? The driver will be judging me.
So is that the plan for Punggol? Eventually, I don't know, have karaoke, have
carpool karaoke.
It's an interesting idea. I'll leave it to the operators to decide, if this is the type of experience they think might be viable.
Yeah.
But why not? I think the broader point then is also then as part of our trials, right? We also want to then understand the social element, right? Then that's what we really wanted to do when we made the push to introduce autonomous vehicles in a residential area. We really then wanted to understand and understand how people react to it, right? And more importantly, we wanted to make sure that people will get to see it, right? People will get to interact with it in various forms, right? Be it whether you're riding a bicycle along the road and you see an autonomous vehicle, or you're crossing the road and you see an autonomous vehicle at a juncture.
Yeah,
we want you to see it. We want you to get comfortable with it, right? And to me, this is what I call public acceptance and public support, and this is quite important to us.
Yeah,
right. I think whenever you introduce something new, right, there's always a little bit of, I wouldn't say a little bit of hesitancy, right? Because you're not quite sure, is this real?
Yeah.
Is this gimmicky?
Yeah, it's one thing
it's
one thing to see in One North or U-Town or what.
Correct.
But even when we were taking it around Punggol, I could see that people were taking out phones to snap pictures.
Yep.
They were looking at the driver's seat to see there's someone there and all that. So that's still something that people are getting used to, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and building this what I call acceptance, right? Takes a while. Right? It's not something that can be done overnight.
Yeah.
Right?
But is that the reason why the color chosen also is a bright I'm not the best with color. I'm slightly colorblind.
Yeah.
Is purple? Is it purple?
Yes, purple.
Yeah. Is there a reason for that choice of color?
Yes. So we wanted it to be distinctive. We wanted it to be obvious, right? That this is an autonomous vehicle. But at the same time, I wanted it to be a little bit catchy and friendly, right? So that's the color scheme we ended up in with, and I had a little bit of my doubts, because purple and bunny and so on, a little bit cartoonish, right? But it turned out, actually, to be fair, it turned out quite nice. I've asked residents how do you like the color scheme? They say, it's nice. It's eye catchy.
It's not something you see commonly on the road.
Eggplant purple.
Eggplant, aubergine, aubergine blue.
So it turned out quite well, and I think I'm quite happy with the livery, the colouring and so on. But that's part of building that social acceptance, right? Making it obvious to people that it's an autonomous vehicle. Yeah. But at the same time, letting them know, hey, this is an autonomous vehicle, but it's no different from any other vehicle that's on the road.
Yeah.
In fact, if you were to look at it, right, in most instances, or almost all the time, it is a better driver than an average human driver, for example. Right? It follows the traffic rules, right?
Yeah.
When it turns right, it always signals, right? When it turns left, always signals, right? When it's amber, right, it knows when to stop and then when to go ahead to cross, right? Ensures smooth traffic flow.
Yeah.
So there's what I call a very good driver in a sense, right? It follows the rules,
Yeah, but the plan is to have it operate without the safety driver on site, right?
Eventually,
and there'll be someone who will be remotely kind of overseeing it.
Correct.
But then how will you assess when the right time is to do that? Because even yesterday when I was in the vehicle, if I look at the steering wheel moving on its own, then it can be a bit unnerving.
Yep.
If I look away, I'm like, okay, yeah, it just feels like another vehicle. If there's no one sitting there, I can imagine, is that the projection that a lot of people would have some reaction to that? And what is LTA's take on that? How long will that take for people to overcome
That's
that?
a good question. We don't have a timeline for that because, like what you said, right, it's very important that people are comfortable with it, and we need to get there, right? So now we are not yet at the stage, right? We are at a stage where we are just getting people comfortable with seeing these vehicles on the road, being part of their everyday lives, right? And once they feel like, it's normal, I can continue on my walk, right? Where the next time, hopefully in maybe 1 month's time, when you go and visit the vehicles again, right? You see, maybe people don't even bother taking photos of it because, it's just
normal.
part of life, right? I think that's where we know that, it has hit a certain level of normalization, right? I can put it. Then the next step then would be getting people to then actually experience it, right? So getting as many people from Punggol as possible to take a ride, right? Because then the next step is, seeing it is one thing, right? Because it's not really part of my life, right? I mean, it is, right? Maybe a little bit when I'm crossing the road and so on, but experiencing it, right? It's another thing altogether, right? And I think once you experience it and you get comfortable that, hey, the steering wheel is moving on its own. Once I'm bored, I don't even bother looking at the steering wheel after a while because it's just so normal, right? Then I just start scrolling my phone, right? Then maybe that's the next milestone. Then we can start thinking about, maybe at some juncture we can remove the safety operator as the next step.
Okay.
Right? But these are the steps that we take. And of course, these are just the social part of what I call the socialization aspect of it. And we don't quite have a timeline. What's more important is that we consistently get feedback from the ground, get readback from the ground to understand, what are some of the concerns or feedback that may have, right? Be it in terms of the safety aspects, in terms of the driving aspect, in terms of even the what we call the user journey aspect, right? So I think these are quite important. But of course, the other part of it, the more technical part of it, is also then looking at the performance of the vehicle, right? How well has the vehicle adapted to its local conditions? Right. So stuff like how many km, right? How many kilometers has the vehicle run on as a fleet, right? So for example, to get to the buy and bite phase, right, which is now where 2 of the routes are at.
The what phase?
Buy and bite.
Buy and bite.
Yeah. So now we are taking on passengers, but it's on a buy and bite basis.
Okay.
So it's like creating that
some
sense
exclusive feel,
the sense of what they call excitement, right?
Okay.
It's coming, right? So, but we wanted to do it sort of like a beta testing, right? Because it is we assessed it to be safe enough. So the fleet, right, the vehicles would have traveled a total of at least 10,000 kilometers
before they can take.
We can even consider them taking on passengers, even if it's on a buy and bite race basis. Because if it's not safe enough or the performance hasn't stabilized, then we would rather err on the side of the caution and then let people on the vehicle only after it's safe. Right. So that's one. The other is, of course, then we look at what I call correlational sort of data, right? So for example, instances of maybe harsh braking, instances of swerving, right? Large swerving, I mean not the minor swerving, large swerving. And instances where the operator just takes over, right? Then we work with the operators, we work with the technology providers to understand each of these cases, to understand, is it really a safety-related issue? Is it something because it has encountered a very edge case or scenario in traffic? It could really be just mundane, right? And maybe it's time for the driver to go for his kopi break, right? The safety driver, so he just takes over, he drives to a spot to park. Which possibly happens, or he needs to go to the toilet urgently. So these are very mundane.
I did want to ask you, because there are thousands of kilometers of testing that happens, but sometimes at the start of the year there was a small little accident as well, and accidents happen, but this was like literally reported as a headline in the news, right? How do you, or LTA, how do you view one minor accident like this, and how does it affect what you think about your testing? And, I know there was a safety timeout and all, but what exactly is the thought process when something like that happens? And what is done to whether it's improve the testing or do something to mitigate that?
Because for context, it actually hit the bumper of a rider on the road, right?
No. I think maybe you can give the
context.
I can briefly describe. So I think it was driving on the road.
Yeah.
Its sensors picked up an object, right, and in response, it steered to maneuver away around the objects. I think then as part of it, the safety operator exercised his discretion to actually take over control. But despite taking over control, I think it still hit the center divider.
Center divider.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, so not to trivialize it, of course, if there were no center divider, what would have happened was just a mount curb, in a way, right? But again, these are the sort of things that we want to pick up, right? As part of the performance of the vehicles. So there are a couple of points here. So I think before even allowing the vehicles to go on the road, right, there's quite a comprehensive testing regime, right, that we have put in place. Number one, we first put the vehicles through what we call a closed circuit testing, right? I call it, the industry knows this, it's called the milestone 1, right? So it's really, you think about it like your basic theory.
Okay.
Right? Early practical, basic theory. I think more basic theory. So basically, the vehicle would be in this closed circuit environment. It's all the way at NTU. There's this facility called 𝘲𝑇𝑟𝑎𝑛.
Yeah, it's closed off.
It's closed off,
okay.
yeah.
And 𝘲𝑇𝑟𝑎𝑛 stands for?
The Center of Excellence for the Testing and Research of Autonomous Vehicles at NTU.
Wow.
It's quite a mouthful, so that's why I refer it
𝘲𝑇𝑟𝑎𝑛.
to 𝘲𝑇𝑟𝑎𝑛. Not to be confused with another city in China. But so it's closed off, but it mimics sort of like our road, right? So it has proper roads, there's traffic lights, zebra crossings, an S-curve, U-turns, and so on. So you put it through its paces, right? Make sure that, basically when you see red, the vehicle stops, right? And it stops behind the line, right? That's one. When there's an obstacle that comes out, right, the vehicle to slow down and stop, right? When it goes to zebra crossing, right, the vehicle will slow down and stop, especially when there's a pedestrian that's walking by. So all these things to make sure that we have the confidence that they'll execute some of these basic maneuvers properly and safely.
It's like a road safety park, but for
a little bit, yes, a road safety park for autonomous vehicles, right?
It's like their primary school,
primary school.
So similar, yeah. And even before taking the test, the operators actually do quite a bit of testing, right, on this closed circuit test already, right? And then afterwards, they go on the public road. But before even going on the public road, we get them to do a demonstration for us. Right, so we'll be there, right, either with a patrolling vehicle and so on. The vehicle have a safety driver on board. Then you'll go around the route that it's supposed to take, and we look at it and say, are there certain things that can be done better in terms of maneuvering and so on and so forth.
And this is to assess the security officer or the...
No, not the safety operator, but really just the vehicle, the maneuvers of the vehicle.
Okay.
Right, could it be better, so on and so forth, right? It's a little bit like, you go on the road with your driving instructor, right? And then your driving instructor say, hey, your left turn is a bit too sharp. Your right turn is not good enough. You anyhow cut lane.
But just to understand, I mean, one of the benefits of AI is that there is this algorithm that is repeatable and scalable, right? So if you are using something that has already been trained on Singapore roads, you mean it's not as simple as installing it in the vehicle and it's ready to go?
So I think a lot of the technology, a lot of it is centered on where their home countries are, right? The traffic conditions, the road conditions in their home country. Right. So for example, if you take the example of, say, Waymo, right? Waymo's tech stack would be geared towards maybe the way the roads and the traffic conditions, right? And the traffic rules are like in the US, right? Then the same thing for Chinese tech providers, right? It will be trained for that. In Singapore, already there's one core difference, right? In the US and in China, they're all, if I'm not wrong, left-hand drive, right?
Oh, I meant vehicle to vehicle. Yeah, not say country to country, vehicle to vehicle. If you have this vehicle that's been already trained the software has learned all it,
Yep.
all the intricacies. It's not as simple as just taking that software, installing it in another vehicle.
It is.
Yeah.
Whatever that the vehicle learns, it should be scalable to the rest of the fleet.
Yeah.
Right. But there are two things about this. So one is that I think when you go through the closed circuit test, right, we have introduced this new thing called a batch testing.
Okay.
Right, which is basically if the operator and the tech provider is able to prove that the manufacturing process, right, and the components, right, are the same across these, then I do not need to test every vehicle. That's the same logic that you're saying. So that's one. So we will just test a sampling, right? But at the same time also then when we look at the on-road performance, right, different vehicles would operate at different times, and the kind of situations that they encounter would differ. Then I think with time also, I think on our end and also then on the operator's end, we also want to keep a lookout on the performance of the hardware, right? The LiDAR, the radars, right? The way it's maintained and whether there are any degradation and so on. And so then that may also then affect the localized performance of each vehicle.
I see.
But broadly speaking, right, whatever that's learned in one vehicle will be applied to the whole fleet. So that's the good part about it, right? It's not a learning that's confined to one vehicle.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. But each vehicle still needs to cover 10,000 kilometers.
As a fleet, it covers 10,000 kilometers.
But you're saying the road safety park thing was the first
It's
level,
the first, yeah.
Okay.
Correct. Then of course that's complemented by a lot of documentation checks, right? In terms of the hardware specifications, whether the vehicle is what I call roadworthy, right? Nothing different from your normal vehicles today, right? Where you have to go through this process called homologation, right? Homologation means basically just making sure that all the parts of the vehicles are manufactured properly, it has been type certified to make sure that it's roadworthy. So those are the things that we still need to go through. And then the closed circuit test is really then testing the self-driving capabilities of it. Then of course, then when you go on the road, there's a demonstration to make sure that the maneuvers on public roads are correct. And then thereafterwards, it starts running, right? On the route, right? And then it familiarizes itself with the local road conditions. And that's quite important. It goes back to the earlier point about, how the core tech stack, right? And the learnings are from the home countries. And the conditions are very, very different. Right? So one of the early things that we realized was that actually in China, the vehicle does tend to have to drive a little bit more aggressively. Right, both in terms of lane overtaking and so on. And that's because they need to suit the local driving context in China, right? Where I think the human drivers themselves are a little bit more aggressive, right? Kind of lane changing and in terms of just trying to get that extra inch in terms of the driving speed and so on. But in Singapore, drivers, I wouldn't say drivers are less aggressive, but I think the type of what we call driving behavior that's more acceptable is slightly different, right? I think if you were to sit in a vehicle that suddenly swerves, right, then you feel quite uncomfortable. And if you're a driver that suddenly see a vehicle suddenly swerve, right, then you also wonder what's up. Right? So those are some of the things that the vehicle need to get itself familiarized with, right? The kind of local adaptation. So that's one aspect. The other is also then, new objects, for example. Right. So, for example, one of the interesting things about Singapore is that in recent years there have been a lot of chickens, right? So this part about chickens crossing the road is a real daily life phenomenon, right? And it's the same in Punggol, right? So sometimes you see chickens crossing the road, and then you need to learn how to spot the chickens, right? That's one. That's a new thing. Plants too, right? So I was told that the palm trees, right? There are certain parts of Punggol that have palm trees. That's also something new that you have to learn, right? In terms of what the
because it is unique to Singapore.
It's unique to Singapore, right? Even I think yesterday we were on the ride, right? Even stuff like birds, right? Interesting, right? So there'll be birds that sometimes, I don't know, they drink water on the road or they're hopping around the road, and then they fly, right? They suddenly fly. Sometimes they fly away from the vehicle, which is all right. Sometimes they fly towards the vehicle. So then how do you react to these sort of situations? So I think these are all the interesting things that the vehicle has to familiarize itself with, right? And also then, very local sort of road markings and traffic rules, right? That he has to learn. For example, this thing about like friendly streets or like school zones, right? When it's marked, right? Then you need to know that, you need to lower its speed. Right? You need to be a bit more alert to spot like school kids and so on, right? So this is a new thing. It's a very local Singaporean thing, right? So these are all the things that it needs to familiarize itself with. And that's why the familiarization process is very, very important. Right? So a very long route, but then going back to that incident, that incident really highlights, why the familiarization process is important. And it's not just familiarization with the road conditions, right? I think there's also an element of the drivers, the safety operators themselves, getting familiarized with the driving behavior of the vehicles also, right? So the safety operators go through a very rigorous training regime. It really the exact details really differ depending on the tech provider and the operator, but they do get, say for example, the chief testers and the chief trainers from overseas in to train their safety operators. Some of them go overseas for training, then they come back and then they continue training in that closed circuit environment in Sichuan before being allowed on the road. Some of them have to go through assessments, right, by a tester, right? And I heard that there are safety operators that fail their initial test. And they will make sure that the safety operators really are able to demonstrate the task needed before passing. So it's quite stringent.
I mean, we were in the vehicle yesterday, and I mean, and they're not just sitting there on their phones. They're literally in their hands in the 8-4 position, right? And ever ready to kind of grab the wheel if they have to.
Correct. Yeah. So I mean, for us humans, we drive a car, I think it's almost never that we have our hands at 8-4 position. Although we are taught in driving school that that's the correct way, right? 8-4-9-3 if I'm not wrong, right? Because once you grab on, it's easier for you to grab on and steer. It gives you maximum leverage to steer. So that's what they're trained to do. And they're trained to do that and to be 100% focused. Right? So if you had a bit of time to notice what the safety operator was doing throughout the ride, right? The safety operator will always be checking, number one, the mirror, the left mirror, right mirror, rear view mirror, especially when it's making a maneuver, right? So those are the situational awareness to make sure that whatever maneuver that's being executed by the vehicle, it is safe to do so. It's double checked by the safety operator to be safe to do so. But that is again a familiarization process, right? The safety driver the safety operator would then need to know, in certain situations, how would the vehicle react, right? And the extent to which the vehicle react, right? When was it swerve a little bit? When does it swerve a lot? Right? And then when is it that he or she needs to intervene? When does he or she not need to intervene? So it's a learning process. And that's why this familiarization process or stage, right, without any passengers on board is so important.
But in the event something does happen, I mean, one problem where there's no real human there is when things like that happen, or things like that hopefully don't happen in the future, but if they do, who's responsible? Because I would imagine as a commuter, even when it comes to things like insurance, right? Like, are there going to be changes to insurance, like how we deal with AV vehicles and all that? And what is the process to determine who is responsible for something when it does happen?
I think that's a good question. So I think today, all the autonomous vehicles that run on the road are governed by what we call a sandbox regulation. And I mean, that's a nice term for saying that, we are still figuring out a lot of these details, but in order to let them operate, we must put in place certain specific guardrails, right? And we know that these guardrails will change as we experiment. So we needed a quick way to put in place additional guardrails as needed, right? So that's why it's sandbox. So it gives, the technical term again is really, it gives the minister powers to then put in place any regulations specific to autonomous vehicles, right? It could waive other regulations that could apply to normal vehicles in the specific case of autonomous vehicles, or it could implement new rules and regulations specific to autonomous vehicles. And I think that's quite important because we need that flexibility and that adaptability to adjust and change as things go along. And it's been quite useful. But moving forward, I think as we learn more and more about autonomous vehicles, right, all these issues are correct issues to talk about issues of liability, who's responsible, right? How do we trace who's responsible? Issues of then, what are the operators responsible for? What are the manufacturers and the tech providers responsible for? What is it that we need them to comply with? Right? Are there certain specific data that we might want to collect from them? How would we want them to possibly treat some of this data? How would we want them to then think about cybersecurity? So all these are real concerns. And I think that's why I think recognizing all this, this is not a simple endeavor. Last year, we set up a AV steering committee that was chaired by my minister, right? To really then, I think, put together, I think, interministerial sort of a committee, right, with key industry and academics coming in to then provide, guidance and direction on all these issues, right? And this is really supported by, I think, working groups, civil service working groups or public service working groups that focuses on various issues, right? From deployment related, right? Deployment operations related. How do you adjust the pickup drop-off points? How do you ensure, there are proper signages? Where else should we next go to beyond Punggol? So these are the issues that I talked about. Or even rules and regulations, right? How do we then put in place a more permanent set of legislation, right? That would cover and provide clarity, not just to the operators or the tech providers, but also then assurance to the commuters, right, and to members of public, right? When something happens, right, they are well covered and they're well taken care of, right, and they are able to get the kind of compensations that's needed. Right? If of course the situation calls for it.
So that means all these are kind of like, because it's so new, it's a work in progress, And do you think, like, is there any fear that people won't accept that? Because it's always like, the belief that, I mean, it can't be, how is it work in progress? It should be settled before you go on the road. Like, how do you all manage that?
So there are basic guardrails. So for example, right, today, anything that happens, we hold the operator responsible, or whoever it is that applies for the, what we call the permit, right? I call it the AV authorization. Yeah, so it's basically a form that gives you approval to conduct AV trials on road, right? So we hold them responsible for anything that happens. Right. Number two, as part of it, they also need to buy adequate insurance. Right. They'll cover for anything that happens, right? Be it minor fender benders and so on and so forth.
As in the operator needs to buy.
Operators themselves. Okay. Right. So the insurance regime applies, right, today. Whatever accident happens, it still applies today. Right. But of course, I do think that there needs to be a little bit more clarity in terms of, then when we talk about tracing the root cause, right, then how do we then apportion, right, the liability and the responsibility? That's one. But then at the same time, then with that being said, right, how do we then still ensure swift compensation to people who may need that when it happens? Right? So these are the things that you want to ensure, and you want to make sure it's clearer. But today there are already basic guardrails in place, right, to do that. And of course, what we also do, we don't just leave the vehicle operators to run themselves, right? We monitor them in real time. Right, so they are actually required to send certain data sets to us so that we are able to monitor them in real life, in real time, right? To see what's happening, right? Whether they are operating within the geofence that they are supposed to be operating, or the route they are supposed to be operating, or whether they deviate from it. So that's very important to us, right? Whether or not there are any safety related incidents, right? So of course, the operators are typically are very responsible. They will share some of these issues or performance issues with us. But without that, in addition to that, we also have a sense, right? For example, we can look at the coordinates of the vehicle as they operate. We can see the speed. So we know when there's a harsh braking incident. We also can see the steering or the heading of the vehicle. So amplitudes in changes to the heading will allow us to then correlate and say, hey, there might be a swerving. Right? We also know when the safety operator takes over the vehicle. So all these, when we triangulate, we are then able to then see for ourselves also, and it allows us to then also then ask the operators, hey, what's up for this? And all this, I think, in this, what I call a very iterative and collaborative approach, I think helps to improve, I think, the safety for autonomous vehicles. And also then, I think, helps to improve the performance And also then helps to build trust, I think, between the regulator and the operator and also a tech provider. And also then I think also helps to build trust also with the public.
So I mean, the technology is very interesting and very cool even for us experiencing it. But why would you say Singapore needs autonomous vehicles like now? Like what's for you what's the why for this?
So I think there are a combination of factors. I think we started looking at it very early, but the technology was not mature. So now the technology is mature. Right? I think the issue is not so much about the technology anymore. It's more about maybe a little bit more the commercial and the financial numbers, right? Whether the cost involved in operating the vehicles, right, or in purchasing the vehicles makes sense, right? But at the same time, we do think it's time to start looking at it already in a serious way, right? And in a way that benefits Singaporeans, right? So there are a few ways. One is, how does it then allow us to provide more direct connectivity, right, to where Singaporeans want to go to, right? Number two, how can I use it or incorporate it as part of my public transport network, correct? Specifically public buses. How can I use it to augment public transport? And also then, through this process, really understand some of the operational nuances, right, that come with it, right? When I switch to autonomous bus, what do I then do in terms of the commuter journey, right? From fare payment, ensuring that the commuter pays their fares. What do I do, for example, where things happen on the bus, right? Then what do we do, so on and so forth, right? So all these things are important, and we need to start working on it now. Because if we wait, say, for example, for the cost to become a little bit more viable, right, then we are sort of like then behind the curve. Then we need to play catch up in that sense. So we need to put in place some of this right now. And of course, then we're also hearing from the industry, that there's the potential for autonomous vehicles to really then complement or help solve or make it a little bit easier in easing the manpower constraints. Right? For example, in the areas of cleaning, right, road sweeping, cleaning, or even in logistics, where sometimes I think hiring may be an issue, right? It's a little bit hard to hire people who are willing to really take on some of these more, like what I described, the more dull, mundane.
But are there any other countries where you feel like the AVs have been deployed in the most idealistic scenario already? Like that's something that Singapore should aspire to or try and catch up with?
So I think the countries that are at the foremost are really in the US. Right? I think mostly led by Waymo.
Okay.
And I think in China, right, where you see quite a few leading tech providers, right? The top three off the top of my head, I think it's WeRide, Pony AI, and I think Baidu Apollo.
They're already operating.
They're already
like
operating.
Taxis
So I think they're operating.
Oh.
In China, I think the main areas where you see a lot of autonomous vehicles operating, I think it's Guangzhou, and a little bit of Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing, and then I think Wuhan.
Wow.
And of course, there are other parts of cities where they are also experimenting, right? But it's smaller volumes. So, but if you go to each of these cities that I mentioned, more often than not in specific areas, because it's not citywide yet. But in certain districts, you will see quite a lot of these autonomous vehicles.
And they're like taxis, kind of like...
There are currently taxis, but I think they're also looking at buses. Right? So I think these three, of course, their main focus are on cars, right, and MPV. So that's why it's more of a taxi or point-to-point kind of a service.
But people are it's sort of part of their daily life.
It's normal.
I
had a colleague that just recently returned from attachment in Beijing. And he said, he was the odd one out because he was the one taking photos of the AVs going by, right? Because being part of the CAM, the Center for Autonomous Mobility team, you want to take photos of the autonomous vehicle, you want to understand the performance, right? Is what we ought to do. But to the local residents, he was an oddity because to them, they were like,
Normal
this is normal. This is normal. Why is this weird fella taking photos of a autonomous vehicle? Right. So that again highlights how normalized I think the situation in certain parts of China already.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, you mentioned like the one thing that it hopes to solve is certain manpower constraints, lah. But I mean, it's the ongoing debate between AI and robotics, right? That is this going to lead to a loss of jobs? But I know yesterday you were mentioning that some of the safety officers they used to be drivers, right? So maybe you can just share a bit more about how there is also going to be an aspect of job creation. Yeah, because it's very easy to say that, okay, this is going to take away jobs. But are there plans to create jobs? And what sort of jobs will they be?
I think that's a good question. In the short term, I think definitely there will be jobs created, quite a bit of jobs created. I think as we scale, right, the deployment of autonomous vehicles, definitely any new area that you go into, you need a safety operator, right? Any major update to, say, the software, you require a safety operator to still be on board to make sure that things are okay. And these safety operators will have to come from experienced drivers, right? Because of the huge, what I call mental load that I think is that the safety operator has, right? 100% attention on the road always. Having the experience to know in certain situations what are the right maneuvers to take, right? These are things that you cannot substitute for, right? And that's where, in the short term, I think these will be some of the jobs that will be available. I think when it comes to remote operators also eventually, you want some of these people who have this kind of experience. That's one. And I think in the short term also, in terms of the impact to jobs, unlikely. I don't see us like bringing in like maybe 10,000 vehicles, right? I think even globally today, right? I think when it comes to these people mover sort of vehicles, I mean, for all the progress that China and US and Waymo has made, it's about maybe 6,000-7,000 vehicles globally.
Oh, really?
Globally, yeah.
It's still very early stage.
So it's still very early stage. It's normalized in certain districts, but it's still very, very early stage, right? So the impact of job loss, right, or job disruption, right, it is there, but it's not something that is in the short term.
Okay.
Right, but of course, when it comes to technological change, right, there will always be a certain amount of disruption. I think we can't run away from it. Right? It happens. But then I suppose, as part of it, then how do we then work together, right, within the government and also with the unions and so on, then create new pathways for these people, right, to transit, right, and not just transit only when it happens, but really start to transit early. Right? So I think some of the operators, they have already put in place certain programs that would allow their drivers to sort of upskill, either to switch to another sector, another industry, or really then also then try to recruit some of these safety operators and remote operators from their driver pool. Right? And I think there will be new jobs that will be created. Okay. Right? I mean, when you bring in these autonomous vehicles, right, well, you remove the driver, but there's also a base ecosystem that you need, right? People to still do maintenance that I think robotics cannot quite do today. Yeah. Right? You still need people to do some of the cleaning, which I think within the vehicles and so on, which I don't think the robots can do quite well today yet. And then there's all the other good jobs, right? For example, your coding, right? Your mapping, your geotagging, and so on and so forth. All these things will have to be done, right? Then also people at the back end that will need to look at some of the systems maintenance, right? Ensuring cybersecurity, so on and so forth. All these things are all important, and a portion of them will definitely be in Singapore.
I did want to ask, like when, say for example, when maps were first introduced to phones and everything, now we say, now I don't even know how to drive to a lot of places that I go to all the time. I just follow what the map tells me. Do you ever feel like there being autonomous vehicles will take away the the romance of driving, and even the way your brain processes directions and all that, and people might end up like not
Lost
more
time.
often than not, and not having a sense of direction because they're no longer really in control of like even driving their own vehicle and all. Do you worry about that for humanity as a whole?
Yes and no. I think that's a very interesting question because we see driving today as sort of like a core skill, right? It's a bit like swimming or what other core skills? I think that's close that
Cooking.
Cooking, right? But actually, if you think about it, right, 100 years ago, people, driving was not a thing at all.
Riding
right?
horses.
Riding horses or horse carriages, right?
Yeah.
That's not a thing at all. And I suspect when it comes to driving, it's one of these things that we, in a way, have sort of accepted driving as a necessary evil. That we need drivers, we need to learn how to drive in order for us to then be able to move from one place to another, right, as needed. But at the same time, Singapore maybe not that much, but we really spend a lot of time on the road. And the question then is, if I'm not driving, then what can I free up the time to do, right? For example, right, I'm a new father, right? So sometimes I take my baby out for a ride, right? I'll be the one driving. And sometimes my wife is on the car, sometimes my wife is not on the car. Let's say if I'm driving the car halfway and then my baby starts crying, right? Then what can I do, right? The worst case scenario is I pull over to a site somewhere, right? And then I go to the back and I comfort my baby. But if I didn't have to drive, for example, then I could just be spending all the time playing with my baby, right? And being able to react. And these are I think it's a paradigm shift, I think for all of us.
Yeah.
Right. That once you take driving out of the equation, right, when moving from one place to another, then it frees up your horizon, your perspective for a lot of things. Right, I think. And that is then something that will take time. Will take time, right? It's not something that will come instinctively and immediately, and it will continue to evolve, right? But then I think in the longer term, right, personally speaking, I think there will be some thought that will be needed to then think about, reimagining the act of getting from place to place, right, is as something maybe a little bit more social, right? Something that's a little bit more flexible for people, right? Where you no longer have to worry about driving, right? You just need to maybe worry about getting on a vehicle, right? The right vehicle. And then as part of that journey, you can do whatever you want, right? You can work on the go, you can have your meetings on the go. You don't have to worry about, trying to overtake the vehicle and so let the vehicle do it.
So bringing back party buses lah.
That's one. That's one.
No,
possible.
because it's an important question to ask, because along that line of like what Terence said about the dulling of your directional sense, right? We hear PM Wong talk about the social compact. We talk about how Singapore is losing its kampung spirit. But does that also? I'm glad you addressed the social aspect, because it feels like the more we take humans out of everything, robotic Hokkien Mee stalls and all that. Is there also something for you, a concern that we might lose that kind of human-to-human connection?
Well, it's a huge philosophical question. It depends, I think. It depends. Right? And I think that's where the implementation, how you implement the technology matters. If you implement it for the sake of implementing the technology in and of itself, then it is possible. But if you realize that, technology, right, is something that has to complement humans, right, has to make life better for humans, then I think you naturally, when implementing the technology, would have to think about how it blends into the social aspect, right? And then once you think about that, then the way in which you implement it, the way in which you curate, I think the journeys that people take, right? Then you start thinking about how can we reshape it in a way that preserves or maybe creates new opportunities for forging this new social compact. So there was a few months ago, I spoke to a private bus company, right? A CEO of a private bus company, a young chap, quite a young chap. So he took over from his dad. And he had this very interesting idea, right? It has stuck in my mind, which is that, how about, using autonomous buses, right? To bring the elderly together. Right? They all need to go, say, for example, to medical appointments, right? And actually, a lot of the time, what they do is, you have a helper and you push the elderly, especially those on the wheelchair, right? You take a taxi. It's a very unsocial sort of thing, right? Then you have to bring a lot of the community together for gatherings and so on. But what if you could actually recreate that while going on your way to a medical appointment? I thought that was quite interesting.
Seniors party bus.
Yeah, it's a seniors party bus, right? You create an opportunity, right? And then in a way, maybe
everywhere. Yeah.
in a way, maybe when you free up the driver, right, the driver no longer has to focus on the driving. And then he can then maybe focus on, interacting with the elderly, the seniors. Right?
So it's bringing like the cabin crew experience to cars.
Yes. In a way, yeah. It's something worth. Right? It's I'm not sure if he has made any further progress on that particular concept. But I thought it's something worth pondering about, right?
Yeah.
When we move towards autonomous vehicles, right? Then how would the in-vehicle experience be reshaped? Right? It's in the early days, really, really early days. Of course, in the next 5 years, everybody just think about, more direct connectivity, which I think is important. A better public transport network, which is important.
Round-the-clock service, I assume.
Round-the-clock service, maybe. And then also, overcoming immediate issues, for example, manpower constraints. But I think the longer term, maybe we expand the horizon, maybe not just maybe 5-10 years, but maybe 20, 30, 40 years. I think you will start to see some of these shifts.
Yeah.
Right. And it will bleed into what we call the social fabric, the social compact. It'll be both ways, it'll be iterative, right? Just like how cell phones have reshaped the way in which we interact with the community, for good and for bad.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think with more technologies, self-driving vehicles or autonomous vehicles will probably have that impact too. And that was also part of the reason why I was excited to join and take on this portfolio, because it is in a way really transformative, right? You think about it, for the longest period of time, right, it was horse carriages.
Yeah.
Right. And then, life was quite different, right? Getting from one place to another, horse carriages is like issue of hours, right, or days. And now you have then came the era of the automobile, right, where you could drive to places. Right? You reduced it from days to hours, it becomes a lot more convenient, but it still takes hours. Right? You waste a lot of time on the vehicle. And now is the era of, self-driving. And I think it is quite a paradigm shift. Right? It's not just in terms of making maybe driving safer or the road safer. It could even then extend to other things like what we talked about, social fabric. Maybe even reshape the way we think about urban planning. Right? Like we've always talked about, how we could also seize on opportunities to make our roads, I think, more friendly, right, for pedestrians, right? A little bit more human-centric, a little bit more pedestrian-centric. And the self-driving vehicles actually offer us that opportunity in the longer term to really think about how urban infrastructure, like your roads, your traffic lights, your expressways and so on, can be reshaped to be a little bit more human and commuter and pedestrian-centric. I think that's a longer term. But we won't see this happening in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So I thought it's quite interesting, in a way, thought experiment, but also then exciting, right?
Yeah.
It's what I think my chief executive called sort of like the light bulb moment, right? Right, when Edison introduced the light bulb.
Yeah.
Right. The immediate impact wasn't quite immediate, right? But then the transformative impact it's had on society, having lights on at any time of the day, and then the rewiring of society, the rewiring of public infrastructure,
and the opening out of nightlife, essentially.
Yes.
But I mean, interesting. And if people wanted to find out more about what is happening in Punggol, and if they want to try it and all.
But now it's by invite only, right?
By invite.
But what's the next couple of months or the next half a year look like?
So I think we are looking to see how we can expand the by invite process.
Okay.
You will hear more news about that soon. Eventually, it will be public. And anybody can go on it. But we thought the buy and buy process or buy and buy right phase is very important, not just to get feedback, right, on the technical performance and so on, but also to make sure that the user experience is fine-tuned. And so now is the phase where we invite people from the grassroots and also then select members of the public. So we had a contest where I think the operators gave away chances for people to sort of take a ride on the vehicle.
Also, it's quite exclusive, lah. Feels like
it's really like a F1 event,
in a way. And I think I get a lot of residents asking my team and I, right, when can I get to take a ride? And I think the next step then will be then to see how we can broaden the buy and buy process. Right, we are still thinking of how to do it. Hopefully, we have some news soon. It could be in the form of like a wait list, right? Where, 𝘓𝘓𝘞𝑚𝑜 does it, right? So 𝘓𝘓𝑚O is sort of like quite a master at sort of this generating hype, generating social buy-in and getting social support and public acceptance. And they have this waitlist process. So it's very similar, right? So one is I'm coming to your area, right? Watch out for my vehicle, right? So they'll make it very big, right? It's all over the place. And then you'll get the support from the local communities, right? Local councils and so on. Saying, hey, my vehicles are running. Right? Please feel free to contact me anytime you see anything. Then the next thing they do is they start inviting people, right? So they invite at the start, maybe people like myself, right? Because I should volunteer myself to take a ride first before anybody else, right? And then afterwards, then we expand it to maybe select people, right? And then later on, then they have a wait list, right? If you're interested, please join this wait list, and then we will try to come to you. And I think that probably will be a next step, sort of a wait list thing, to further fine tune the process, right? Get more sentiment from the ground on how the process, right? The entire ride process is like. Safety, the performance, right? Whether it's still smooth and so on. And we want to get a quite polished product, right? Before going out to the public. I think that's what we really want to get right. And there are many, many, many little things that we need to get right. Just within the vehicle itself, not just in terms of the driving, but also then certain things like even the booking process, pick-up, drop-off points, what kind of things need to be done, the way you're orientated, where you are picked up or dropped off, is it the best, right? So we need to make all these adjustments. And we want to make sure that we know what needs to be adjusted, and we have the chance to adjust it. Before opening up the public. So it's a little bit of a MVP beta testing, right? Where we get people provide feedback, right? Both the good and the bad. And we take it on board, and then we try to improve it. And then once it's more or less a little bit more polished, then we open up the public. But I think there is a keen interest on our end to see how we can bring as many people as possible to take a ride on the autonomous vehicle, right? Because part of the normalization process is really getting people to experience it. Right? It's not just to see or be aware that it's there, right? But really to experience it. And the experience itself is, I wouldn't say transformative, but it is eye-opening. Right? You take a ride itself, right? And that's where you know that it's here. And that you have really nothing much to worry about.
And if people wanted to find out, is there a link that we can send them to or something?
Yes, there's a web page I think on the LTO website to find out everything about autonomous vehicles, our testing regime, our testing processes, and also what we are doing, right, in terms of all the use cases, right? I think the operators will have their own website talking about autonomous vehicles, and there's an email. Right? So if you're interested, please drop us a note.
We can put the email in the link.
For both operators, and also for us, And I think we'll be happy to see how we can accommodate this interest.
Awesome. So sign up, almost like signing up for the wait list.
The coolest club in town.
The coolest club in town, the AV club, man. But thanks so much, Nicholas, for sharing your thoughts. And I mean, and what we can expect in the future.
Yeah.
Now we just have the final question, which is the one Shiok Thing, which we ask every guest.
Yeah.
We can go first, so you have a couple of minutes to still think.
Yeah.
Terence, you have your one Shiok Thing.
Yeah, I mean, I thought just now it was very interesting in talking about paradigm shifts in society and how we reshape the place we live, right? So there's a video that was out by a YouTuber who focuses on architecture in the world, and she has a video about a new pyramid theory which explains the missing evidence. So I think what conventionally the mystery of how the pyramids were built has been something in modern times we've always never really figured out. So what I thought was really interesting about this video, one little anecdote she shares in this video is that Cleopatra lived closer to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the building of the pyramids. Which blows my mind, right? But the idea is that even till today, there's very little evidence of how the pyramids were actually built. So there's a lot of new theories. There's a new theory that she talks about here about maybe the pyramids were not built from the ground up, but sort of deconstructed from a larger hill from the top to bottom. That's why it's able to maintain its perfect symmetry and its perfect angles and all. So again, this is a kind of paradigm shift in thinking about how something is built.
Yep.
It's not built up, but it's actually like carved down, and the structure follows from there. Yep. So if this theory is true, it also changes the way we think about how the society used to function, and how their building techniques were, and what kind of even the structures of who actually built the pyramids. Yep. It wasn't like slave labor or anything. It was actually skilled artisans who were doing it. Yep. So all these things, the devil's in the details. And even after all these many years, we still don't know it. And I think, but the pyramids themselves stand as a testament to how that society thought about, and they thought about very complex issues like that. So I thought this video was super interesting, even though I don't fully understand a lot of the physics of it, but just the idea that there are still people grappling with the how the pyramids were built, that problem today. That's fascinating.
Mine is also a throwback to the past somewhat, because 6 days ago a trailer for the new Netflix documentary called The Dinosaurs dropped. It's executive produced by Steven Spielberg. And I mean, I love anything to do with dinosaurs, and I think it's a series. So it talks about the advent and the extinction of dinosaurs. And the trailer itself looks cool. So the rise of dinosaurs, and then the fall after the asteroid hit the Earth. And it's coming out, I think, in on March 6th. So dinosaurs.
I love dinosaurs.
Love dinosaurs. And I mean, now you have a 5-month-old kid.
Yes.
So dinosaurs also at some point.
When I was a kid, my favorite movie was this cartoon called The Land Before Time.
Okay.
Probably anybody around
our generation
era, watched
Land
it.
Before Time.
So,
Dinosaurs.
Soft spot for dinosaurs.
Cool. And what about you, Nicholas?
I had a bit of time to think about it because I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and I thought this was a very interesting question. But the problem is I had too many of this one Shiok moment. Maybe I'll just list one. So ever since I had a kid, right, I haven't really had time to read. So I've resorted to Instagram and TikTok to fill the time while doing night duties, right? When you're petting the kid, baby to bed, and then you just look at the videos. So I started following Jimmy Carr. So Jimmy Carr is this
comedian, right?
British comedian. It's this very classic British humor, right? It can be both very crass and yet very sophisticated at the same time. And I love that kind of contrast. But at the same time, he does have a lot of words of wisdom. And I think one that really particularly struck me was the topic of nostalgia. There's a recent wave of nostalgia, right? The 90s and the 80s was such a good period in life and so on, right? Or maybe even the early 2000s. And his response was actually, that is just human nature, right? To always be nostalgic for something that used to be, right? And actually, if you were to take a broader view, technological progress in and of itself has made our lives really immeasurably better, right? For example, he cited the example, say, for example, 50 years ago, right? you wouldn't, or maybe beyond 50 years ago, you wouldn't have had hot showers. Right? We take hot showers for granted today. But if you rewind maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago, hot showers was not a thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's something that we take for granted. But it's something that's only possible with technological progress. And there are many, many other things that we take in a way for granted. And he had this equation that I cannot quite remember, but it was more of your happiness today is really determined by what, I might be butchering this, what you have right now minus the sense of what you could have had. Right? So there's always this what if. Right? So it's really when people project in a way their insecurities about technological progress and so on, it is real. I would not trivialize it. But at the same time also, there's underlying element, right, of the what ifs. Right? And sometimes, we take an easier topic, right, like AI or tech, and say, yeah, that's the cause of my woo, right? For example, TikTok today is the cause of the woos across many kids and so on. But actually, is it really the case? So I think that was something that really struck me when I listened to Jimmy Carr, and he's a lot of these nuggets.
Because he does the thing where people ask a question and he answers, right?
I thought it was really, really insightful. Then maybe a coda to that would be science fiction. I'm not usually a science fiction fan, right? But ever since I've worked on drones and on autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, I started reading and watching a little bit more sci-fi. And there are two images, right, that come up in popular culture, very, very relevant. One is Dune. Right? Dune is this it's an amazing movie, also an amazing book, but very weird book, I must say, or weird book series. It's a very dystopian future. It's curiously a future that's very dystopian without AI. Right? It was even stated in the book that there was a war many, many thousands of years ago before the story took place, where it was humans versus AI. And AI was either wiped out or exiled to the deepest reaches of space. Right? But even without AI, right, the way in which civilization progressed in that series was very dystopian, right? Some kind of absolute authoritarianism there, coupled with a fight for a very scarce raw material that only existed on the planet of Arrakis, right? And it contrasts that to Foundation. So I think Apple has the Foundation series, right? And again, while AI is curiously missing, right, it's still a little bit more dystopian, but it's a more hopeful sort of a future because, a little bit of a spoiler, at the end of the series, it's revealed that actually a lot of the orchestrations was actually done by AI. This sentient, all-knowing AI that was left on the moon after the wars between, again, humans and robots. There's always this underlying theme. But because I think it was written by Isaac Asimov, and I think one of the 3 robotics law, the first one is that the robot shall never be programmed to harm a human. So then that's where the whole story unfolds, right? Based on this one law, how it has shaped the long arc of history. And I thought these two contrasting images on AI or the lack thereof and its impact on history or civilization as told through science fiction, it's quite interesting. And again, it's something for us to all ponder about, even as we talk about all sorts of things about AI, its pluses, its minuses, and so on.
Oh, interesting. Wow. We got 3 one-shot things for the price of one. Oh, solid.
Very relevant to this.
Yeah, very relevant. And I mean, it's nice to see how passionate you are about it. So thanks so much for sharing. And I think a lot of useful info. And I mean, I really enjoyed the ride yesterday. I think yourself as well.
I would encourage anyone who can get into the club.
Get on the club. I mean, we're already part of the club, so we can try and get you all in.
We're hoping that in the not too distant future, there's no longer a club where you get to ride it. We are working towards that. But in the meanwhile, I think anybody that's interested, please feel free. And thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And if I have a privilege of joining again next time, maybe a podcast on a vehicle.
That's true.
Good idea.
So, Terence, how do you find that chat with Nicholas?
I mean, wow, this is someone who really lives and breathes autonomous vehicles, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've had a few experiences with him, but you can tell that he's super passionate about it. And I think last 10 years, maybe he's been looking at it already. Right?
Yeah. I think that was the most refreshing thing because, I mean, these autonomous vehicles, it almost doesn't feel new. Because like what we said, the video that we made, which is on Ministry of Funny, we'll put a link in the show notes also, was in 2016, and it felt like, it's been around a long time. So it could have been just like, hearing the theory and the practical aspects of it. But I think what was most interesting to me was his own personal passion.
Yeah.
And asking him the questions about, the future of AI, humans, jobs, I mean, he clearly has thought about it.
I mean, you think he says that, I studied poli-sci, has no relevance to what we're doing now. Actually, it has complete relevance to what he's doing because it's really about integrating this completely new technology into an infrastructure that has been there for so long already, that every human living in Singapore interacts with it on a day-to-day basis, and trying to layer on this technology on top. It's more than just about integrating a technology or going through feedback and bugs and all that.
It's politics.
It's politics. It's politics. Like, I think the questions you asked about, jobs, even thinking about the future, like why does Singapore need this, and then comparing ourselves to other countries, that's all politics. So correct. There's a very big relevance to what he actually studied, contrary to what he himself says, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the one question still remains. I mean, he clearly has thoughts about it, but I think there's so many uncertainties, which he also acknowledged, about what is going to happen in future, how is the social aspect going to be replaced, and I think that is still going to be an ongoing question for anything related to AI or robotics.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was quite interesting that we got to experience it, although it's still a very limited pool of people who have experienced it.
Yeah,
we got to experience it and, see its little kinks, feel every little bump along the way that it still has.
Yeah.
But then also talk to, the guy who's living and breathing it every single day, and how he sees it is different from how we are experiencing it also.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing was he mentioned multiple times that, okay, at the end of the day, this has to benefit Singaporeans.
Yeah.
Of course, you can say one thing, the reality might be different, but at least a starting point, hearing you say that, okay, feels like he's putting a lot of thought into it, and hopefully his team is as well, which I'm sure they are. So, I mean...
but as a parent of a young child as well, were you also sharing the same thing? I have more time to play with my daughter if I'm not driving.
No.
I had this feeling that maybe, I don't know if Harish would agree with that.
Hey, you telling me sometimes I won't deny, when I'm driving, I'm like, okay, my wife is in the backseat. I'm happy to be driving. Okay, my baby's crying, my wife is my baby. I'm okay.
Your job is to just drive, right?
I'm okay. You don't tell me you don't feel that. You don't feel that.
Okay, if there's someone else in the vehicle, but if you're alone,
that is tricky.
So I think he's very specifically pointing to that scenario when he's alone with the kid. He'd rather be playing than driving.
Yeah, it's true, because I mean, any parent may have been in a situation where the car's crying, the baby's crying behind, and you can't do anything.
I saw you, I felt you twitching when you were saying that. Like the guilt in your face was there.
No, in my mind, I was like, wow. No, sometimes I just want to drive. I'm just happy driving. Like, that's the best thing, like my baby's behind, my wife is with my baby.
But I saw possibilities that that whole last mile thing in Singapore.
Yeah.
I just, in Singapore, whether I'm sweating like 99% of the time, and being able to just get to that last part of your drive without having to, deal with bus schedules or that. Hopefully that helps out to solve that.
Yeah. I mean, the one thought that came to mind was like, now you have all these home-based businesses, Can you imagine next time you have pods, it's like a hawker store on the move. Then you can eat and no one's worried about driving because it's so smooth. Then I was like, hey, shit, when you think about the changing what it means to get from point A to point B, interesting.
Yeah, and he talks a lot about sci-fi as well. In my mind was like, all the autonomous vehicles that you watch in sci-fi movies, Minority Report or what. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see in which direction we follow.
Either Dune or Foundation. Like what is it?
Foundation, My mind was more like Minority Report or Demolition Man. Not so, not so literary.
Yeah. But I mean, hope you all enjoyed it as well. If you did, please, send this podcast to someone who might enjoy it as well. Everything we mentioned, the links are in the show notes, and you can also follow us wherever you're listening to us right now, including social media, so Reddit, Telegram, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you want a weekly newsletter with all our One Shiok Things, you can sign up for your little bit at yalabat.com.
And if you want to work with us, email us at contact@ministryoffunny.com or just go to ministryoffunny.com, see what we get up to, and there's also a contact us page there.
Sweet. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you all soon.